Thank God for Becca Caldwell. Oh, that's all I have to say.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah, she's my techie. Awesome. It seems
Great.
like we already have like 1,500 people watching. So
whoa,
yeah, we're live.
We
right
better
on.
get our shit together.
Yeah.
That's great. What is your situation there?
So I'm at home, obviously, like everybody in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it is epically snowing outside. Like, check this out. We got I think we got like 2.5 feet. Can you see that?
Yeah. Whoa.
I backcountry skiing is illegal, but I don't know if that counts if you do it like off the roof of your house. I'm thinking about doing that.
I know. We have the same situation down here in Boulder, so people should know that we've probably had, this is the second in the period of power's been going out all day, so there might be some disruption based on that, but cool. Well, I just should introduce this whole thing. Welcome to Conservation Conversations, which is an extreme tongue twister. If anybody wants to write in with a more pronounceable title for this, that would be great. But what this is just a series of conversations over the next month or so, kind of exploring the intersection of outdoor recreation, outdoor sports, and also passionate about the environment and the places we play. And I tend to follow national politics and Colorado politics. But, I think I'm no expert in environmental policy. So part of these conversations, I'm hoping to educate myself and figure out what role I can play, and hopefully do the same for everyone who's watching. And of course, you almost need no introduction. Here we have the illustrious Tommy Caldwell, probably the greatest big wall free climber of our generation, one of the greatest climbers of all time. Also proud to say an old friend of mine, collaborator, and I guess, a lot of you may know Tommy from the Dawn Wall, either the climb itself or the film, The Dawn Wall, which we produced and my partners, Peter Mortimer and Josh Lowell, directed, or maybe Tommy's book, The Push, all about that, really just inspiring climb. It's a dark time these days. And so I'm just really happy to see you and talk to you, because you are someone who has inspired me in the past, and hopefully, amidst the darkness, and we're going to talk about some kind of dark stuff, you can bring some light and some inspiration.
Yeah, we'll talk about dark stuff in a very fun, sunny way, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, to give you guys a little context, so I've actually been working with Sender Films probably for like over 20 years. So we've actually known each other for a really long time. Like the Dawn Wall was kind of the most recent film, but either Big Up Productions or Sender Films has been a part of my life basically my entire climbing career. So yeah, you guys are at the bottom of the screen here looking at one of the people that have made my dreams happen.
Likewise. Thank you. So anyway, we'll just talk for about a half an hour or 45 minutes. We really want to just explore Tommy's journey, because in addition to being a climber, Tommy has really started plans and the need to address climate change and environmental policy in general. And it's been a really inspiring conversion to see. So we're going to explore that a little bit. And then hopefully at the end of about half an hour, 45 minutes, we'll have time for some questions. Before we dive in, Tommy, so you're there with your family.
Yeah, I figured I should probably introduce them a little bit because
please.
You know, I'm in my house here, and there's going to be definitely some chatter in the background because you know,
yeah,
they'll probably be running in here at times. But yeah, my wife and kids are over here in the living room. I was in the dining room right there. You guys want to say hi? That's Ingrid.
Hi, Ingrid.
Becca. They're doing some art projects these days. That's pretty common for us, and that's Fitz. Want to say hi, Fitz?
Hey, Fitz.
How's it going, Nick?
Yeah.
Hi, Becca. Thanks for the IT support.
Yeah, always.
And yeah, we're in this new house that we just moved into right before this whole coronavirus thing went down. So
wow,
we're pretty stoked actually because we're way up high on a mountain. We can like look out across the old Continental Divide, which we can't go into right now, and we can't see it at the moment because it's epically snowing. But the house itself is kind of old school. Like here's our sweet sofa. It's got a
oh my God, that is classic.
A dog with a dead bird in its mouth. We got all the furniture with us.
It's more baller than my situation. You know, my wife is a climate scientist, so she has a really important job. And so she gets the office in there. And I'm literally just, my office is now in our foyer. That's literally my front door right there. So
yeah,
this is where I have to edit films.
Yeah.
And Tommy, how are you getting out? What's that?
I said, while I was giving you a tour, I'll show you two more things.
Oh yeah.
Here, we should talk about this wolf. This wolf picture was taken at the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Wow.
So that's staring at us all the time. That 5 feet from us.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about Anwar, I hope.
Yeah, get there. Yeah, and then we got hangboards hanging all over the place in here too. That kind of keeps me sane these days.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, speaking of keeping you sane, like, what is your approach to outdoor recreation amidst this?
I mean, these days it's full lockdown. Like, I think my idea of what's responsible to do in this, in this world of quarantine kind of evolved. Like, when it first started to go down, I was like, oh, maybe I could still go on, my spring road trip, just stay way out in the wilderness. And then pretty quickly, like, realized that wasn't a good idea, nixed that plan. And then I was like, oh, I'll just stay home, but still go out in the mountains and climb and ski. And then you start to realize that if you do that, that's like, if we get hurt doing that, that takes up room in the hospital. So now it really has been, like, homebound. I get out. I've been running a ton around my neighborhood. Like I live in a pretty low population dense area, so I can get out and run a lot. I've been, getting into more scientific training methods, and then mostly spending a lot of time with my family. Like, if I ignore the fact that the world is falling apart around us, I've been pretty stoked actually. Like, the family time has been, sometimes, like, it's like hard to be in the same house with your family all the time. But for the most part, it's been really, really good actually. Yeah. And life is just slightly slower, which is nice.
Yeah. So speaking of the world falling apart around us, I mean, we should just acknowledge, we are in the midst of a very tragic and scary pandemic right now. And, where our heart goes out to anyone who is suffering either a sick family member, losing someone, or worrying about money problems. It just seems like we're surrounded by that stuff right now. But even still, while that goes on, the world is kind of ground to a halt and the economy is ground to a halt. There are environmental issues out there that are really urgent and remain urgent. We are 7 months away from a big election in November, and probably the biggest presidential election of our lives for anyone who cares about the environment here in Colorado. And I think we're going to be a little bit Colorado centric on this call, simply because the Republican Senator Cory Gardner is up for re-election. And even though the pandemic has happened, the Trump administration and their congressional allies, of which Cory Gardner is one, and the big polluting industries that support their campaigns are really continuing with their big mission that's been going on for 3 years to dismantle environmental regulations in this country and try their best to figure out a way to sell off public lands. Kind of showing my hand here as a progressive. I hope nobody minds that too much, but you know, we just think, you know, I mean, just as an example, I don't know if people know this, but right now the Trump administration has basically told the Environmental Protection Agency to stop enforcing any pollution laws whatsoever. So Trump has just basically said, hey, polluters, all you guys, go ahead and do whatever you want. We're not going to enforce anything because of the pandemic. And so the situation remains really urgent. There's a number of issues that we're going to discuss, hopefully, on the call. So people just need to, I think, stay engaged and stay talking about this stuff and see what we can do to help. So anyway, I just wanted to get to your story, Tommy. You know, a lot of people probably the last time they heard from you, depending on how closely they follow your career, you were topping out after 18 days on the Dawn Wall and in front of the whole world and the whole global press watching. And I'm just, you know, I remember Barack Obama like giving you the thumbs up and everything on Twitter. And it was a really inspiring moment for me personally. And I'm just wondering, I remember us talking about what are you going to do after the Dawn Wall? And so I guess what have you done after the Dawn Wall? What has been your post Dawn Wall life?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that the Dawn Wall did for me is that it kind of gave me opportunity to kind of go anywhere that I wanted, to do anything that I wanted in a way that I hadn't had before, which was a really good thing. The other thing it did is it made me, you know, certainly an unintentional bubble until the Dawn Wall, and then it kind of blew that up. So I've been, you know, struggling to adjust in some ways, but also like taking advantage of all this tremendous stuff. Environmental advocacy was something that I don't know, I guess I was dipping my toes into it before the Dawn Wall went down. And
how did that start? Maybe we'll just start at the beginning. How did that start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways I've always been conscious of it, just because as a climber and somebody that lives in the outdoors, you're kind of in love with nature. You're seeing the change. You have this very intimate relationship with nature, and so therefore you see the change, and plus you go back to the same places year after year after year, and so that gives you perspective to see how they're changing over time. And
due to climate, mostly.
Yeah, due to climate.
What kind of changes and where? Could you give us an example, maybe?
Like maybe one really, like, the most pertinent example to me is Yosemite Valley. Like when I started going there as a kid, Yosemite Valley looked a lot different than it now. It was basically a dense pine forest in the valley, and especially in the past 5 to 10 years, you know, forest fires have ravaged, you know, kind of most of the area to the west of Yosemite. Yosemite Valley itself has had big drought-induced beetle which has made it so the Park Service has had to come through and cut down most of the pine trees so that they don't fall on tourists, essentially. So the valley floor has gone from a pretty dense pine forest to more of like an open oak forest, or it's transitioning pretty quickly. You know, places like Patagonia. I think my first trip to El Chalten in Patagonia, there's this magnificent big wall on the west face of Poinsano that you can just like walk right across the glacier to. And since the world is drying, that glacier is now, you know, broken up and tumbled, and you can't get to the base of it anymore. And all these roots that were ice for so long are melting out. I think you kind of start to see it, you know, in your climbing objectives first, but kind of everywhere. So I had that perspective, but what really got me involved in being like an advocate and trying to make a difference was really the Access Fund. I joined the Access Fund board almost out of guilt because I'd gotten in trouble for building a trail on the western slope of Colorado by the National Forest Service when I was like, 14 years old, to this crag called the Fortress of Solitude.
I never knew that.
Yeah, some park rangers had busted me, and I thought it was legal. I thought, we just go up there. I like the ability to climb. I thought was just like this privilege, and I thought we could just go and do it. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, technically, they told me I couldn't bolt. They told me I couldn't build a trail. Turns out bolting was totally legal, but building a trail wasn't. And we didn't build much of a trail. We just like raked some things and like cut a few bushes. But anyways, all of a sudden I was like a 16-year-old with the National Forest Service after me. And so I was like, I called Access Fund. I'm like, what do I do? How do I deal with this? And so they jumped in and kind of like helped explain what was going on. But joining the board was pretty transformative because I started to realize that we as climbers can make a big difference. So I spent 6 years on the board of the Access Fund.
And we should clarify, the Access Fund is an organization, great organization. If you're a climber, you have to be a member, but they advocate for climbing access for climbers, which is endangered all over the country. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, like all the way from like a local level, like they buy little crags here and there, to like going to DC and working with the National Forest Service and the National Park Service. And so anyways, they started these events called Climb the Hill, where we'd go to DC and we'd lobby. And so I started to get to know the lawmakers through those events. And I always, like at first I was like, this is weird seeing, like, why would climbers show up? What could they do? I didn't really like it that much, but I started to learn how DC worked, and having kids made me want to really make a big difference. And
talk about that for a sec. What do you mean? What?
I mean, when I had kids, I don't know, they just have a way of making you, like, extending your idea of like I think before you have kids, you think of time in terms of what you're going to live through. Once you have kids, it kind of extends to what your kids are going to live through. And you're like, well, as long as I'm thinking about that, I might as well think of the future of humanity. And so maybe climbing, I think if you don't have kids, you maybe worry a little bit less about climate change because you're like, I'm going to die before it really gets bad. But once you have kids, you realize that they're going to have to live through some crazy stuff unless we fix the systems before that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and what about as a Patagonia athlete? I mean, Patagonia is your sponsor. You're an ambassador for the clothing company Patagonia, and they, they've always for my whole life have been, pretty good corporate citizen in terms of their supply chains and where they get the resource their stuff. But just recently, last couple of years, they were like changed their whole mission statement as a company to like, our whole purpose as a company is to help save the planet. And I don't know, how has that influenced you? And I guess I should say they've made you not just a climbing ambassador, but an activist ambassador, one of only a few for the company. And what role is that like?
Well, I mean, I think Patagonia and Yvonne and Melinda Chouinard specifically have influenced me hugely, as I think they've influenced the whole community of climbers. Like, I think one of the reasons that climbers are so into environmental issues is because of them. I mean, they're more than them. There's a lot of history of kind of environmentalists, people like John Muir. He was like an avid scrambler. But in more recent times, Yvonne and Melinda have really shaped this vision, and their company is an incredible learning tool and flow of really, really good material. And then you're right, a few years ago, they changed their mission statement to, we are in business to save our home planet. And as an ambassador for the company, everything shifted. Like, that's all, anybody that you're talking to, even if they're a clothing designer, pattern maker, they're thinking about what they can do to push the company more towards this mission statement. And I've just found it inspiring. Their supply chain stuff is kind of crazy in terms of how well vetted everything is now, and they know exactly the impact they're making, which is a lot. I think when they decided to really look closely at it, they're like, oh man, we are destroying the world and we need to stop destroying the world. And if they're destroying the world and they're conscious of it, everybody else who's not even thinking about that is even doing worse. And so I don't know, I just got more involved in it. I was going to DC for these Climb the Hill events, and I sort of, without intending to, became the climber that was most into these environmental initiatives. And so they hired me on as this environmental ambassador. They called it a global sports activist. And so now that is like officially part of my job title.
And another organization you've been working with is Protect Our Winters, protectourwinters.org. It's a great resource for any people who are involved in the outdoors. They started out as kind of a ski-focused organization founded by Jeremy Jones. But they've really expanded to try to represent climbers, runners, everybody. And it seems like they've done almost more than anyone to really try to bring together outdoor enthusiasts to sort of act as a single voice on environmental issues. Is that, have they been and I know that you're part of their team.
Yeah, I'm a Protect Our Winters climb ambassador, I guess. Yeah, I mean, Protect Our Winters is pretty, there's only, I think there's, I mean, they're growing pretty quickly. I think there's like 10 or 12 people at the company, but the first 3 or 4 were just like so badass and such heavy hitters that they shifted this culture within the ski industry first. And they're just like so good at taking these big complicated issues and distilling them down to like these very simple points and broadcasting them out, and then kind of like rallying the army and getting everybody behind them. And yeah, they're like Patagonia for me. They've also been an incredible training tool. Like before I agreed to become a POW ambassador, I went to one of their trainings because I wanted to see if I felt like I could be effective. And, you know, at their trainings, they brought in climate scientists, and I just learned so much. And then I did a lobby event with them where they organized this whole press conference that was at a Senate hearing, and all of a sudden we're up there on stage, like presenting to senators in the Senate hearing room. And it just all seemed like it was, yeah, and I was like, wow, these people are just so motivated and going for it that they're making a ton of difference. So I felt
wow. So first of all, what were you down in DC advocating for with Protect Our Winters?
So part of my role for Patagonia, like when I first joined as a global sports activist, I was like, I need to do sort of a launch expedition. So I was looking for something that I could go climbing on, do a cool adventure, but also advocate. So I went to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and that was this last summer. I'd been there about 10 years previous to a place just adjacent to it called the Gates of the Arctic National Park, where I fell in love with this northern Alaska area. But I went to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is really in threat. Like, they're trying to open it up to drilling, and the oil companies, you know, pitched this idea that it's total wasteland. But those that have been there know that it's like the farthest thing from a total wasteland. It's, you know, there's herds of, 10,000 caribou that wander through there. This magnificent mountain range called the Brooks Range. I mean, it's like it is certainly the most wild place I've ever been. Wow. And so I went on this adventure where that wolf picture, we took that picture, and then, we just had this cool climbing adventure, and we take these pictures, we have these stories, and then we go to DC and we talk to our lawmakers, and we tell them how special this place is and why we need to protect it. And so that helps further, there's a lot of organizations, and then we are able to kind of swoop in and help them with their initiatives. And
I know that basically oil companies have been trying to open this place up for oil drilling for at least 10 years now. What is the state of play up in ANWR at this point under the Trump administration? Okay,
so yeah, it's been a fight. Like, I think it was in the 80s. Like, ANWR was the big thing. Everybody's like, we gotta save ANWR.
Yeah.
And then it sort of like died off for a while because it didn't seem like drilling was going to happen. And then last year, the Trump administration snuck in this provision into the military funding bill that opened it up. So it was like, if you voted to not have drilling in ANWR, that meant that you're voting to not fund the military. So it's like a
sneaky bastards.
Yeah, it was like sneaky and kind of this new way to do things. So all the senators and Congress people voting for this kind of had to make this hard decision. So they just like voted to fund the military, and all of a sudden ANWR is open again. And so then there becomes this big fight to introduce bills that take it back off the table. So HR 1146 was a bill in the House that did take it off the table, and we went to lobby for that at one point. And actually, while I was in DC, that passed in the House of Representatives. But then, I don't understand why these are partisan issues, actually, but it just the way politics works these days, it didn't pass in the Senate. Didn't even come to a vote in the Senate yet. And so that's where it stands right now. It is open to drilling. The oil companies could go in there unless the Senate passes a bill to take it back off the table.
Wow. Well, we'll talk at the end about what people can do, but obviously calling your senator is an important part of American citizenship if you care about these issues, but we'll get to that. What are some other issues that you've been advocating for? One that's on my mind right now is the CORE Act, which is, I guess it's 6 months ago this month that the House passed the CORE Act, which is probably the most important legislation of our generation, that would, in terms of protecting land, water, the places we play, wilderness here in Colorado, over 400,000 acres of wilderness. Is the CORE Act something that you've been talking to senators about?
Yeah. I mean, I've been to DC twice talking about the CORE Act. This bill was introduced by Senator Bennett, and Senator Bennett knows that I'm into, Colorado. And
that's Michael Bennett. He's one of our two senators. The other one is Cory Gardner.
So when I go to DC, I usually get to meet with both those guys, and Bennett was one of the co-sponsors of the bill. And so I've become kind of like friends with him a little bit and his staff. And so whenever they're trying to pass initiatives, they'll loop me in and try to help me to broadcast their message. And so it's been pretty fun.
Cory Gardner, our other senator here in Colorado, it should be noted, even though I think he sits on the subcommittee, and why this bill has not made any progress in the Senate is because Cory Gardner won't support it.
Yeah, and to be clear, basically Cory Gardner is the only, in my mind, pretty much the main roadblock right now. Like, if he supported it, I think all the other Republican senators would jump on boards just because he's a Republican senator in Colorado. So everybody else would jump on board and it would pass.
So you heard that if you live in Colorado and you are a constituent of Senator Cory Gardner, go online, find the phone number to either his office in Washington, D.C. or Denver, and call him up. And if you care about the wilderness and wilderness protection here in Colorado and you want to see that happen, then you should be calling Cory Gardner. It's the most powerful way to get stuff like this done. And then if he does not respond to any of us by 2020 when he's being up for re-election, just let him know that his job is on the line because you care about this.
Oh, well said. I mean, and I think it's going to protect 400,000 acres or whatever, and I think our public lands are the reason people want to live in Colorado. This is like our most valuable economic resource in a lot of ways, and so that's one reason if we want to recreate in these areas. But the other reason that we need to pass, protection of public lands is just to take it off the table for fossil fuel development. The more land that we can take off the table, the better it's going to be for climate change. So it's kind of like a twofold reason that I really support the CORE Act.
So when you're down in DC, you get along with Michael Bennett. What's it like meeting with Gardner, and what's it like? What does he say when you say, "Hey, man, I think you should support this bill"?
I mean, so meeting with Bennett is like this big love fest. We tell climbing stories. It's awesome. Meeting with Cory, and usually meeting with people who oppose the bills is slightly uncomfortable, right? Like, you're trying to apply pressure, but you don't agree, and you kind of leave the meetings being like, I don't know. Cory Gardner's a weird one because he just likes to kind of celebrate and act like you're on the same page. Like, you go in there and he's like, "Oh yeah, I love climbers. I love outdoor recreation. Oh, this is," just like, it feels like this big celebration, but the whole time you're thinking like, well, why don't you ever vote that way? And like, you leave the office, he almost like wants to high five you or something. And then you look at his voting record and you're like, he's not he's not passing anything environmental.
That is Cory Gardner's superpower, is to like make friends with everyone, even though he's like shivving your interests in the back.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a kind of a fun guy to hang out with. You like you, that I can understand it is that he is just like so in the pocket of the people supporting his campaign that his votes. I think that's all he thinks about.
Millions of dollars from oil and gas that are funding his campaigns. I mean, I remember in 2014 when he was elected, he pitched himself as a moderate, and he has this campaign ad where he's like, I bet you're wondering what a Republican like me is doing in front of a wind farm. Well, I'm a different kind of Republican, you know, and he really pitched himself as kind of a green Republican and has kind of just voted down the line for special interests of oil and gas and other polluters. So call Cory Gardner, everyone. Yeah, I mean, what has your, after a few years of this, like, what is your experience in DC like? Like, what's your, what's it been like? Has it been fun? Are you going to go back? Do you hate it? Like, what's the...
I mean, it's like, I don't know. Basically everything in life I view through the eyes of what I know through climbing. And a lot of times it's miserable, especially at first. Like my first couple trips to DC, I was like, what am I doing wearing a suit? I don't even know how to tie this tie. Like, I'm going to talk to politicians. And I didn't feel like I was making any difference. But then now I've been back like 6 or 7 or 8 times, and I'm starting to make friends with people. And I would say it's getting to be more fun, mostly because I feel like we're bearing fruit. Like the things we're talking about are actually working, and I've started to realize that. Like at first I didn't think they were working, but on my last trip when I was talking about the Arctic, I was talking to Senator Caldwell from Oregon, and she's like, man, because of that trip that you did to lobby for the LWCF, and she like kind of laid out all these things that happened that made that the Land and Water Conservation Fund get reauthorized. So she's like, that worked. This is how it's working. And then I show her a picture of the wolf in the Arctic, and we celebrate. And yeah, it's become pretty fun. I think the allure of making a positive difference has become like a little bit too hard to resist. Even though I don't love going to DC, I'm like a total introvert. All I really want to do is just like climb all the time and be with my family. But the fact that I feel like I have a platform to make a difference, I feel like I would really be squandering that if I didn't go.
It's heroic. What are some you touched on this, but what are some of the lessons that you take from climbing into this new adventure in environmental advocacy?
I mean, I think the main one is that like solving climate change is like this absurd seeming goal. Like it's way out there in the distance. It doesn't seem clear. And you don't know if you're really going to be able to do it. But I think one thing I realized through climbing is having that big goal out there in the future kind of like sets up your life in this way that formats this kind of incredible adventure and makes it feel very purposeful. I think everybody wants to work towards something grand because that adds purpose to life. I've done that in climbing. Doing that in terms of something that actually matters for like the lives of people on this planet seems very much more purposeful. And yeah, so I think that's it, essentially.
You really don't do it.
Fitz just handed me this to Daddy from Fitz. It's a whale, I think. Is that a whale or fish? Yeah, fishy.
Nice one, Fitz.
Origami. Thanks, bud.
It's origami.
Yeah.
That's great. So what so you're kind of leaving us on a positive note, which feels really good. What is, before we go to questions, like what is like one thing that you could tell people who are into the outdoors, who don't get involved in politics? It doesn't have to be one thing, actually. If you have like a short set of bullet points for people who are passionate about the outdoors but want to try to make a difference, what are those bullet points?
I mean, I think the first one is get educated, like read some books. Kind of the most activating book I've read on climate change is called The Uninhabitable Earth. It's a pretty dark read in a lot of ways, but it's like, this is what the world is gonna, could look like if we don't make big changes. So read those. I think get involved in a community of people that care. And one of the best ways to do that is join environmental nonprofits. Patagonia has a really great tool to do this called ActionWorks. You can go onto Patagonia ActionWorks website and find local environmental nonprofits and start giving them money or volunteering for projects, because really that you're going to help the nonprofit, but really what that does is it gets you in a community of people that care, which is the greatest kind of like learning tool and motivator. Is to get involved in that community. And then after that, donate money is always good if you have some. And then
vote
and vote. Yeah, but vote is like the easiest one in a lot of ways, but also the most effective. So get out there and vote. And then one step before vote is make phone calls. Pick up the phone, call your lawmakers. Not many people do that, but when you go to DC and you're sitting in the office, there's like somebody in each office like taking this like live Yelp review all day. They actually do answer those phone calls, and it does make a big difference.
It's hard for people to wrap their heads around that, because I think people are cynical about their ability to affect change at that level. But it really is true. You ask any elected official and they'll tell you that pressure helps. And, when the National Rifle Association wants to resist sensible gun laws, they all assemble and call the crap out of their elected officials. And that's how they resist that stuff. I think I have the hope, and I think you have the hope, that outdoor enthusiasts could be like the NRA one day. This is not something that's happening yet. I think we're quite enthusiastic about it. The folks over at Protect Our Winters articulated it for me really well, that was like kind of their mission to do that one day, to be the NRA of the outdoors. And that seems really powerful, and it really it requires citizen engagement and a commitment to that.
You think about the NRA as one of the biggest lobbying forces in existence, basically. And outdoor recreation, in my very biased view, has more reason to be a big lobbying force. So there's no reason it can't.
Right. Cool. So I think you think we should take some questions?
Totally.
I'm getting fed some through the good people at Rocky Mountain Values, who are sponsoring this call, and they are folks who here in Colorado are trying really hard to get the CORE Act passed and to apply pressure to our elected officials. One person we didn't mention in terms of elected officials is, Scott Tipton, who's a congressman from the 3rd District. If you live on the Western Slope, chances are you're in his district. It's a huge district. He has been extremely resistant to the CORE Act passing, even though a lot of these public lands and lands that would be protected are in his district. So if you live on the Western Slope and you care, also find Scott Tipton's phone number. So anyway, let's see. We'll turn.
And beyond that, like Protect Our Winters did this really big study of all the possible swing districts that are going to affect the most, affect the next president. Have a large percentage of outdoor loving people and close enough to being a swing district that they could potentially affect the next presidential election.
Wow, that's strategic.
Colorado's 3rd district was on that list. So
cool. Yeah, they're very good at finding. Even Powell will like go and find your local crag and tell you how that crag is being affected by climate change in order to try to like wake people up on the really local level. This is really great. Okay. And another really act and on a number of fronts. So that's a good resource at conservationcolorado.org. Okay. So
if you want to know more about the areas of the CORE Act, you can go to the Outdoor Alliance website, and there's this incredible tool here that like maps it all out. And there's even like you can click on boxes that show you where all the climbing areas are, where all the trails are, and
that's cool.
You see it, and you can overlap them all, and it's just like such a great download of information.
Oh, that's super cool. Okay, so let's see. I'll take a question from Katie Colpert. How would calling Cory Gardner to try and change his mind make any difference? I guess we kind of just answered that. I mean, Katie, I would just say if he's not responding, then the next step is to vote for someone who's running against him who represents your opinion on protecting public lands.
Yeah, Cory Gardner is in a really weird spot right now because he has the lobby like paying him basically to vote one way, but most of Colorado are really into the outdoors. So basically, the people that are voting him in are thinking another way. So we just have to kind of like feel like we're enough of a force to win out. And
Cory Gardner, are you listening? Are you listening to Tommy right now? And to Katie? Come on, let's do this.
Yeah, so yeah, we just have to create the perception that there are more of us who care that enough to vote, and then he will change his mind.
This is an interesting question. How are climate change and coronavirus connected? Do you know the answer to that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think the world is being broken down in this kind of crazy way right now, and we will have the choice moving forward of whether or not the chance to be bad for climate change. Like all these economic stimulus packages that are going down right now, unfortunately, the people that have the biggest voices in terms of where that money goes are the people that have the biggest lobbying forces in DC, which is oil and gas is like, one of them. So that's why they're getting huge bailouts. I think they basically all those oil and gas leases, I think they basically made them free because they're just trying to prop up the industry. I'm not sure exactly how it's going down.
Yeah.
But they're getting huge benefits.
Yeah. And that's another thing that people can speak out on, making sure that these huge omnibus stimulus bills are going to support people, support the environment rather than polluters.
And then kind of the more positive spin on that is we get to see for a brief period of time how clean the world can seem without so much pollution going into the air. I mean, the canals in Venice are clear for the first time in like 50 years. They calculated that the amount of methane over New York City is like 50% of what it was, and all of a sudden the air is so beautiful and clear. There's you don't hear traffic everywhere you go. Like we get a little brief taste of that, and it kind of tastes good. So
yeah, and I think on a positive level, hopefully, I mean, there is this analog to the fact that like everybody is affected by this, and the world needs to cooperate for a solution. And I think climate change is at this distant remove, just enough that people aren't feeling it. But coronavirus is kind of reminding us that we're all connected, we're all affected, and the same with climate change. Another thing worth mentioning is that, I mean, studies have shown that respiratory illnesses that are really making people really vulnerable to COVID-19 are coming from pollution, from local pollution. So when it comes to the environment and environmental policy and environmental justice, and this stuff is really affecting poorer, more vulnerable communities, minority communities in a much greater way, and it's really putting the onus on environmental justice as an issue.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. Do you know of any resources for elementary age students to help them learn that their choices truly can make a change? What do you tell your kids about this stuff?
I mean, there's tons of kids books out there. Like we have a great kids book about Greta Thunberg, like a children's book. We try and get children's books that the children's books have a way of distilling down climate change into this very simple, digestible format. So look to those books.
Greta Thunberg's a great example of how a young person can take a stand and make a difference and make her voice heard.
Yeah. Let's see. My wife's over here. What other resources? Yeah, I mean, tell stories of animals. Kids love animals, right? Like that wolf that I showed you the picture of. My kids want that wolf to be protected, right? So, we can talk about how these you just start to help your kids kind of they inherently can make the connections if you just help them a little bit.
I always loved Dr. Seuss's The Lorax.
Yeah, totally.
This is a good kind of edgy question. How do you balance the massive increase in popularity in climbing with protecting the natural and sacred places from erosion and destruction? Climbing has an impact. How do you kind of popularize climbing and engage in climbing while really keeping an eye on its impact on the natural environment?
I mean, you always have to weigh out the impact versus the potential good. And I think climbing, the more climbers that are in the outdoors, the more impact the outdoors is going to have. But we can educate people on how to minimize that impact. And then we can also, I truly believe that when people are out in these beautiful natural places, they tend to fall in love with them and want to protect them. So I think that the trade-off is absolutely worth it. We just have to kind of perpetuate this culture of paying attention to nature and wanting to protect it. And that's very much within climbing right now. So we just got to keep it that way.
That's great.
And places like the Front Range of Colorado, where we both live, actually the fact that there's more climbers have meant that there's more organizations and more people thinking deeply about the impact, and local nonprofits like the Boulder Climbing Community start building trails all over Boulder. And I actually feel like the impact of the climbing areas in Boulder is less in your face than it was 10 years ago. Because
and the Access Fund and local access organizations, they're not trying to just open up climbing areas. They're also trying to instill a sense of stewardship and organized stewardship to make sure that climbers are good citizens.
Yeah.
We've gotten 3 questions about updates on the protection of the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. You talked a little bit about it. Can you just underline sort of if people want to get involved, what are some resources for that?
Yeah, so the Alaska Wilderness League is the best resource. So if you just go on their website and learn from them, they're the ones that really have I wish I would have done some research into the current state. One thing, I did get an email today that said the price of oil is like really low right now, and one thing that's doing is it's making it so hard to explore areas are no longer financially viable, at least in the moment. So there's a big area, Arctic region in northern Russia, that they were trying to open up to drilling, and basically they decided not to right now because of the oil prices. I'm hopeful that will happen in the refuge as well. Like, it'll buy us some time. They'll just decide that it's too expensive right now. And so
but then they're getting a bunch of subsidies to prop up their industry. I mean, my friend Doug Hayes, who's a Sierra Club lawyer and also a really avid backcountry skier, he's been, for the Sierra Club, litigating for the last 10 years, fighting the Keystone XL pipeline. Shout out to Doug for that work. And he just told me that they're just breaking ground in Montana right now on a big section of the Keystone XL, going across the border, shipping in tons of workers and work camps that are on the border of indigenous lands and vulnerable populations at a moment when, the pandemic is happening. Seems really irresponsible. Let's see. Oh, also, I should mention that you can go to RockyMountainValues.org to learn a lot about this stuff. Let's see. Oh, have you been able to engage, from Melissa Bear 93, have you been able to engage other climbers in your climate activism? I want you to answer that. But first, I know that you've been having recently, we made another film about you and Alex Honnold breaking the speed record on the nose. And I know that you guys up there were having a lot of conversations about environmental policy and activism up there with Alex. I know Alex has always been super interested in the environmental protection. He runs a nonprofit that raises money to provide two different approaches to environmental activism, you and Alex Honnold. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, everything I do with Alex is just like, it seems so fruitful and fun, and we just like get into it so much. And part of that is our ability to debate and banter. Mm-hmm. And so we debate this a lot. Like when we're walking up and, walking down from climbing the nose every day, we're talking about this kind of stuff. And yeah, so he he started an organization called the Honnold Foundation, and he's raised tons of money for that and installs solar panels. And he's pretty adamant that he thinks this kind of like grassroots way of putting solar panels on the houses of people is the best way to make a big difference. Because I don't know, he just doesn't believe in policy change as much. I don't know, he doesn't like policy. I'm not really quite sure why. And I kind of debate with him. I'm like, if you want to make the big difference, you got to go to, which he does this as well, but he doesn't kind of like go at it as hard as I do. You got to go to DC and you got to lobby and you got to write letters to your politicians. And so we have kind of two different approaches.
I mean, if you really look, I mean, I think the Honnold Foundation doing amazing work. It seems like if you really look at the structural obstacles to environmental progress, they're happening in Congress and they're happening at the level of the federal government. Those are the folks that really need to wake up and change things. Okay, let's see. And anyone else? Any other? Have you been able to engage climbers in this so far? How do they respond?
Climbers respond great. I mean, I've done tons of presentations. I've gone to like MIT and done presentations, and I feel like climber groups of people really want to get involved. They're energetic. They're idealistic in a lot of ways. I mean, I feel like I've been able to engage tons of people. Like we've had these big letter writing campaigns, collectivism stuff that we get, millions of people, at least going onto these websites and talking about it. POW is great about doing these text to action campaigns where I can go and just say like, send this text message and it'll, you'll join POW and then it'll inform you and then it'll give you a link to, send an email to your lawmaker. And yeah, I think it's working.
So how do you sign up for that stuff? How do I get those alerts?
So if you go to Protect Our Winners has got pretty much any nonprofit website, environmental nonprofit is going to have ways to do it. I wish I knew the current text to action for Protect Our Winners. Should have set that up actually. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they do them specific for different events. But yeah, usually it's like text, POW climb to 52886 and it'll like sign you up and get you going and sometimes enter you into a drawing where you can win free stuff too, which people like free stuff. So
yeah, free stuff. Yeah. Well, I feel like we could go on forever, but you've got, I think, some homeschooling to do. Are you doing homeschooling?
Yeah.
Are you teaching the classes?
Yeah, we homeschooled fifths for kindergarten, so we kind of know school is providing us with all sorts of stuff. Like he was on a Zoom call with this whole class as a first grader today, hanging out with this whole class virtually. And so we've been having fun with it. I mean, I would say 40% of the time it's like pulling teeth to try and get him to do schoolwork, and then the other 60% he's kind of into it. So I feel like we're actually lucky in that way.
I think parents across the world can relate to that situation right now. Tommy, thank you so much. I guess before we wrap, we'll just say I think Rocky Mountain Values is going to record this conversation. So I think Tommy and Sender Films will put links to the recorded conversation as well as to some other resources on our Instagram feeds for people to follow up. And you can go to rockymountainvalues.org or their Facebook page. Anything else you want to add, or should we call it?
No, I think we're good. That's been almost an hour already. Flies by. Crazy.
I know. Yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone out there for joining. Remember, the election is coming up in November, and call Cory Gardner and tell him to pass the CORE Act, man. Yeah, he's supposed to represent our interests. We elected him.
Actually, the reason we did the call today is I think it's like the 6-month anniversary to the introduction of the CORE Act today.
Yeah, so, it's been 6 months, dude, sitting on